In the latest chapter of One Piece, Oda brought us a brand new disease. An illness that causes its victims to generate hard, rock-like scales on their body as well as turn their skin blue when exposed to sunlight. These conditions, if left to their own devices, will eventually prove fatal. What is Sapphire Scales syndrome exactly though? And how did Ginny, and then Bonney, get it? Ginny got her illness sometime during her 2-year stay at Marie Joie, and promptly got kicked out once she did. What was there in the Holy Land that caused this? At first, I played around with the idea that this was a celestial dragon transmitted disease, where you could get the illness once you bed one of the royal families. Cough cough, a One Piece version of an STD. This would also explain why Bonney would end up having sapphire scales as well, since some STDs are hereditary. This could be disproven though by an SBS where Oda insinuated that Doflamingo and Viola got quite passionate back in Dressrosa. And if that did indeed happen, then why didn't Viola get sick as well? Was Dofi special? Another thing that hasn't been explained is why other celestial dragons don't have sapphire scales. Of course, we could have just not seen any affected ones as of yet, but to play devil's advocate, what if it just doesn't affect them? Or what if they have something to combat the illness? I've seen a lot of people say that the celestial dragon suits could be what protects them from this disease. And while I dismissed this idea at first, what if they're right? So my main reason for combating the suit theory in the beginning was that not all celestial dragons wear the infamous spacesuits. We've seen Garling, the rest of the Holy Knights, and even the Gorosei without suits on, and they haven't shown any symptoms. Hell, Doflamingo and his family don't wear the suits either. And that is why at first I didn't believe that these suits were special. That was until I started playing around with a different idea. What if the suits weren't always necessary? Which now brings us to the main point of this video. I don't think this disease is a celestial dragon STD. Actually, I believe that the sapphire scale disease is obtained by being in contact with a special object. In chapter 1098, while trying to get Bonney diagnosed, one doctor mentions that Bonney's illness is not white lead poisoning, kind of stating the obvious, but I believe that Oda name-dropped white lead again after hundreds of chapters for a reason. In case you might have forgotten, while a lot of characters refer to it as white lead poisoning, its actual name is amber lead syndrome, and was caused by, surprise surprise, coming into direct contact with amber lead. When first contracting amber lead poisoning, it is practically unnoticeable, because the symptoms don't quite kick in yet for some time. But when it does kick, it becomes awfully apparent. Your skin starts slowly becoming white. Your body gets weaker and more pained until you eventually kick the bucket. To top it all off, this disease is hereditary. If the parents had amber lead syndrome, then the kids, the generation after them, will as well. I believe that amber lead and sapphire scales are closely related. The obvious thing that ties both of these diseases together, of course, would be the name, since both amber and sapphire are real-world gems. The next tie-in would be the skin conditions. Oda could have just given us another sickly coughing character like Roger or Usopp's mom, but instead, this illness showed visible skin symptoms. The next similarity, of course, would be the perfect explanation of why Bonney received this disease years after being born, since she wasn't really exposed to celestial dragons, nor whatever object caused this disease in Ginny. And lastly, Bonney gave us the middle finger, just like Law, who was suffering from amber lead syndrome. Now, what object could have caused sapphire scales, you ask? I believe sapphire scale syndrome is caused by prolonged exposure to the sunlight tree Eve. The sunlight tree Eve was first mentioned in chapter 612 when Nami was asking King Neptune about the mysterious light source at Fishman Island. Neptune told us the reason why Fishman Island stays illuminated is because of the sunlight tree Eve thousands of miles above the island. The tree absorbs the light from the sun and brings it down to the bottom of the ocean. What they have never directly stated though is that thousands of miles above Fishman Island, on top of the red line, is the Holy Land, Marie Joie. The sunlight tree Eve resides alongside the celestial dragons. I believe that this tree is what caused Ginny and Bonney's illness. Why don't celestial dragons have sapphire scales then, since they live near the tree, you ask? Because of their suits. While you don't need to wear the suit every day, you might need to wear it while you're close to the tree itself. This would perfectly explain why the Gorosei and Saint Garling are not seen wearing protection, because they are not currently within the tree's radius to receive the illness. The celestial dragon suit, the protection against the sunlight tree Eve, is the one that only a member of a royal family can wear, a suit that wasn't made for Ginny. Amber lead syndrome was ironic, a beautiful white lead that was sought after by many, that ended up turning its wielders white. Sunlight tree Eve, a tree that absorbs and brings fishmen sunlight, only to curse those near it with a disease that disallows its victims to be in the sun. So now, let's talk about the scales. The sapphire scales that form on the skin, I believe, is a pseudo-misdirect from Oda. When you hear the word scales and celestial dragons in the same sentence, the first thing that pops into mind are actual dragons. We've been waiting hundreds of chapters to find out why they're called celestial dragons in the first place. Hell, they even have a dragon's footprint as their defining symbol. But what if the sapphire scales that appear on the body are not supposed to look like dragon scales, but instead, the scales of fish? Oda hid what Ginny's face looked like in her final moments, but based on brief shots of her body, we could tell that the scales manifested all over her. Oda hid the face for a reason, and I believe it is because it would reveal that Ginny started developing a fishman-like appearance. While I'm saying this doesn't exactly have to be the case, but it would be another tie-in to the sunlight tree Eve. The tree absorbs light from above and brings it down below to Fishman Island. So who's to say that the tree doesn't absorb Fishman essence from below and brings it above? It would also be quite funny to think that the best way to protect yourself from getting sapphire scales and looking like a fish would be a celestial dragon fishbowl helmet. And hey, Oda could have been hinting this all along, since his standard avatar in almost every chapter and interview depicts a seemingly human man with a fish for a head. Just imagine how poetic it would be if a celestial dragon were to unknowingly get this disease by being exposed to the tree. They would become what they've discriminated against this entire time. And just like the fishmen of the present, to protect themselves, they would have to isolate themselves somewhere where light couldn't touch them, like far below in the ocean. You might be saying, Sai, trees normally don't give illnesses though. Why would sunlight tree Eve be deadly? Korra! Back in Skypiea, we've actually already seen a version of tree-borne illness in Noland and the Shandorians' backstory. When Noland first arrived on Skypiea, the Shandorians were afflicted by tree fever, a fever that turned the skin green and rendered its victims bedridden, much like Ember Lead, which turned the skin white, and Sapphire Scale, which turns the skin blue. It kind of feels like Oda is trying to collect the rainbow when it comes to diseased skin colors. Nolan deduced that the reason why Skypiean inhabitants were getting sick was because of the Kona tree, the tree that the Shandorians worshipped. To save the Shandorians, Nolan did what had to be done. He knew that the only real cure to it would be to cut down the trees. We already know that Oda, in this final saga, has been bringing back old reference points and parallels from the past. We've had Thriller Bark with the Rocks Pirates, we had Saboti with Egghead Island, Marineford with the Volume 107 cover, Enies Lobby with the reintroduction of Rob Lucci and Kaku, and even Alabasta with Vivi and King Cobra. I believe that this right here is just another callback Oda has been plotting. What I really like about this theory is that if the Sunlight Tree Eve is what is causing the Sapphire Scale syndrome, then this could explain why Madame Charlie predicted that Luffy would one day destroy Fishman Island. Just like how Nolan destroyed the Kona trees to save the Shandorians, I believe that Luffy will destroy Sunlight Tree Eve to save the Sapphire Scale victims. And by destroying this tree, it would destroy Fishman Island, which I just gotta say isn't exactly a bad thing since all fishmen want to live on the surface one day, so this could just be lighting a fire underneath them to get them to come and join the rest of humanity. And not to mention, but a lot of people do believe that Luffy will one day destroy the Red Line so that he can merge all of the seas together. By destroying Sunlight Tree Eve, this would do that, because the tree is rooted within the Red Line. So Luffy unknowingly could be killing two birds with one stone by destroying Sunlight Tree Eve. So going back to the Kona tree for a second, if you dig into the Kona tree One Piece lore, Oda confirmed in SBS 32 that the Kona tree and tree fever were actually inspired by a real-world genus of plants, but he twisted the name and tree to fit the world of One Piece. Amber Lead Syndrome is the exact same, since lead poisoning is a real-world problem. I think Sapphire Scales could be the exact same. Oda could have mixed two separate illnesses to come up with it. One being photosensitivity, an allergy to the sun, and the other being a rare but scary syndrome called Tree Man Syndrome, where victims start sprouting what seems to be tree bark on their skin. This could be the tie and twist to Sunlight Tree Eve Oda was going for. So yeah, that's all I have for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on this little adventure. Please let me know what you think about this theory down below. And also, if you noticed it, I didn't have a face cam on for this entire video up until this point, so I would also like to know how you feel about that. Do you want the face cam throughout the video, or no, at the end is just fine? I know that's a really silly thing to ask, but your opinions really do matter to me, and I would love to hear what everybody has to say. So again, thank you so much for stopping by. My name is Sai, and I'm signing out.